Thank you again for joining us today. I'd now like to turn it over to Stephanie Hussey, RBFF State R3 Program Director.
Thanks, Joanne, and thank you all for joining us today. We're excited to share with you the results of a project that was funded through a multi-state conservation grant program and it's a project with Responsive Management, who's here with us today. The project is to help state agencies, organizations, and industry partners in prioritizing Angler R3 programs to fund and support. And proposal evaluation scorecard was developed for the R3 community as an outcome of this project. And the Responsive Management team is here today to share with you the results of this project and the insights and to share the resources with you. And now I'd like to turn it to Mark Damian Duda, who is the Executive Director of Responsive Management.
Thank you, Stephanie. Really appreciate it. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. You all can see us, but we can't see you. I wish we were together, so hopefully soon we'll do these in person again. My name is Mark Duda, Executive Director of Responsive Management, and I am joined by two of my colleagues, Marty Jones, who will be taking the bulk of the webinar, as well as Allison Lanier, who many of you know over the years. As you know, Responsive Management's been around for 32 years, and both Marty and Allie have been with Responsive Management for over 20 years. So I'm sure that at some point in time, you all have interacted with them. So now you get to see them and hear them. So really appreciate it. We're going to talk to you about something really interesting. It's an Angler R3 program funding needs assessment, the results of that, and what went into a scorecard to judge grants. Marty, next slide, please. I probably know most of you online here, but if you don't, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of us and who we are and what we do. We've been doing survey research for natural resource organizations now. This is our 31 years, so next year will be 32 years. So if you feel like I've been around forever, I have. So, and that's a great thing because we love what we do. Over that time, over 32 years, we conducted about 1,000 survey projects on natural resource and outdoor recreation issues for every single state agency, all 51 of them, 15 countries. We do a lot of research for the RBFF ever since its inception, actually before its inception, and others, NSSF, ASA, a lot of the organizations that we're all contribute to and members of. We also do work for Winchester, a lot of the industry folks, Vista Outdoors, Yamaha Motors, and then we also do a lot of work for the nation's top universities. Sometimes it sort of looks like a college top 25, if you will, you know, from Auburn to Alabama to Clemson to Duke and basketball and others. So anyways, with that, I just want to give you a background. Again, we all know each other. I can't see you. I don't know who's on, but I know we've got a lot of great people. So thank you. Marty, next slide, please. What I want to do before I turn it over to Marty is just give you sort of a brief overview of the big picture of the project before Marty starts getting into the specifics. Next slide, please, Marty. Each year, with states competing over a finite amount of grant money from NGOs, RBF and other organizations that manage grant programs are faced with the challenge of determining which R3 programs and projects to fund. The RBFF and Responsive Management received a multi-state conservation grant a couple of years ago to complete a comprehensive needs assessment of what the research to date and the Angler R3 community indicate are the most important and effective and worthwhile programs, with the overall goal of providing state agencies and partners with strategic direction for which R3 programs and projects should receive the highest priority for funding. The study involved a research review and surveys of state Angler R3 coordinators, academics with Angler R3 expertise, and grant reviewers to determine which R3 programs have had the greatest success at increasing fishing participation. The final report identifies the elements and qualities common to the most successful R3 programs and initiatives and presents this grant funding scorecard to assist you all, the R3 community, in making decisions about which programs to support and to fund. The scorecard provides strategic direction for state agencies, partners, and NGOs when allocating R3 funding, resulting in the greatest return on their investment. Again, I'd like to thank Joanne to make this happen. I love doing this, but I always get nervous with electronics and new types of go-to webinars and stuff. So she made that process very smooth. So thank you, Joanne. And also thanks to Stephanie, because she was really involved with this project and really helped make it a lot better. So thanks for that. Finally, I'd like to thank everybody, because I would be willing to bet most of the people online here probably did a survey or did an interview with either me, with Marty, or with Allie. So thank you for your time. So we're going to sort of take it from the survey perspective now to the results. So let me turn it over to Marty. Some of y'all have not met Marty in person sometimes, because he's our report writer and usually he's really busy writing reports. So I'm really pleased to have you guys meet him in person. If you've ever read anything by Responsive Management, chances are that Marty was involved in writing that. So thank you very much. Marty, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. I'm going to talk first about the methodology we used in this project, and the methods were fairly straightforward. We took a look at reports and evaluations of R3 efforts, as well as some scoring systems that had been used in the past by various organizations. And these were used to develop the survey that followed. And the survey was used to tap the expertise of agency R3 coordinators and personnel with Angler R3 experience. And we also conducted a survey of academics with Angler R3 expertise as well. And we then analyzed the data and developed the scorecard. That's the 100-mile overview of what we did. But regarding the survey itself, we wanted to learn from those with R3 experience, and we felt that we could learn both through their successful efforts as well as those that were not as successful. Therefore, the agency personnel survey started with a section on respondents' most successful Angler R3 efforts, and then we had a smaller section about less successful efforts that was at the end of the survey. In between those was the second section of the survey, which looked at respondents' opinions on what they saw as the most relevant criteria for scoring grant proposals. We essentially picked their brains on how they might score proposals. Then, as I said, we included a section on less successful efforts, but we put it at the end of the survey simply because we thought respondents might not be as enthusiastic to talk to us about those. So we didn't want to start the survey with that. The academic survey followed this structure as well, with wording differences to account for the different group being surveyed and some slightly different questions. The survey was available online, but it was closed. That means only those invited could complete the survey. People surfing the net weren't going to stumble upon this survey and take it. Respondents were also contacted by telephone in follow-up. An attempt was made to contact every respondent by telephone. So the survey could be completed in 3 ways, whichever was the most convenient to the respondent. Respondents could fully complete the questionnaire online with a follow-up call conducted by responsive management staff for clarification and any further elaboration that respondents wish to add. Or they could partially complete the questionnaire online and then fully complete it by telephone in the follow-up call. Finally, they could simply review the survey first and then complete the whole thing by telephone at that time, whichever they preferred. This made sure we had a good response rate, allowing people to do whichever way was most convenient to them. The data analysis, the surveys obtained quite extensive responses to questions. In many cases, entire paragraphs were given to properly answer the survey questions. These responses could not always be quantified. So in this way, the survey was a sort of focus group where the value on some questions was the nuanced response rather than something that could be quantified. And we'd like to say again, thank you to everyone who took the survey and the time to give those extensive responses, because we got a real wealth of information from that. So in summary, some of the data were quantifiable and could be expressed as percentages, and some of the data was qualitative. And from those results, the scorecard was developed. So let's talk first about the results of the research. There are 4 areas I'll discuss in the research findings: top elements and objectives, the target marketing, the ratings of various aspects, and top grant scoring factors. We'll take a look at each one of these aspects individually. Now, the top elements and objectives. In the survey, we asked about the elements that were involved in respondents' most successful Angler R3 efforts. And the large majority of those successful Angler R3 efforts entailed email blasts and email communications, basic skills training and basic fishing education, and websites and web pages. When we asked about what the most successful Angler R3 efforts tried to accomplish, respondents said it was providing information and assistance with where to go fishing or where and how to buy a license, as well as some skills building. And finally, the top objectives often mentioned in successful Angler R3 efforts are to obtain customer information for further tracking and outreach, particularly information that ties into the agency license database. And as I said, in the survey, we had asked people to discuss their most successful Angler R3 effort. And these are the results about those most successful efforts. We also had a section on target marketing in the survey. And when we looked at target marketing, in Angler R3, the most common approach for targeted marketing characterizes the audience by its place within the outdoor recreation adoption model, rather than by a demographic characteristic. The top target markets included new anglers and novice anglers at the top, with short-term lapsed anglers also high on that list. All those are based on where the angler is within the outdoor recreation adoption model. Nonetheless, there were other target markets mentioned and not based on the outdoor recreation adoption model, and they include families, urban residents, and then people within a specific geographic area. These were all the groups that were most commonly targeted by those successful Angler R3 efforts that we talked about in the survey. The survey also looked at the ratings of aspects of successful Angler R3 efforts. Agency personnel rated the 5 different aspects of their most successful Angler R3 effort using a 0 to 10 scale, with 0 being not well at all and 10 being very well. Agency personnel gave their highest ratings of their most successful Angler R3 efforts in reaching their target audience, meeting the objectives, and defining the objectives, and those are the top 3 rows. Lower ratings, meaning that work needs to be done to better these areas, were given to having efforts be supported by adequate agency resources and having the efforts be properly evaluated. This last rating is particularly interesting because in the latter part, in a later part of the survey that we'll see in a little bit, the criteria with the highest importance rating was that the effort include an evaluation component. It was given a mean rating of 9.1 that we'll see in another table in a second here. But when you compare that to the 6.2 mean rating given to how well their most successful effort was actually evaluated for effectiveness, you see that's quite a difference. And that 6.2 is the lowest rated of the efforts here in this table. Then, as I talked about, that the R3 effort have an evaluation component, you see the mean rating 9.14. It's much higher than how it was actually rated from that previous table we just saw. But the top grant scoring factors, the topic was approached in open-ended questions as well as through ratings of 41 possible factors that we presented to survey takers. For each possible criterion, respondents rated its importance for scoring a potential grant, with 0 being not at all important and 10 being extremely important. At the top of the ratings, among both agency personnel and academics, are 3 factors that pertain to the evaluation of the Angler R3 effort: that the effort have an evaluation component, that it have clear objectives so that it can be evaluated, and that it have defined metrics to allow for an evaluation. Also important are that the effort can be replicated in the future so that efforts can build on one another, and that it have a defined target market. Ensuring that the effort is well defined in its purpose is highly rated, as shown by the second item, that the effort have clearly established goals and objectives, and the 5th item, that the target audience is defined. The report on which this presentation is based has the full table of all 41 items that were rated, as well as all the other data that was used for the development of the scorecard. We can't show all 41 factors here because it's just, the table's too long, but please reference the report if you'd like to see the full results. So we'll now take a look at the scorecard itself and its components. To start though, we design phase considered the words of agency personnel and academics in the survey. So we based it on their experiences and their opinions. And as I said, they gave quite extensive answers. So we had a good basis on which to proceed. In this way, the design was pragmatic. It was based not on a hypothetical theorizing, but on the practical experience of those who make proposals, those who score proposals, and those who carry out the R3 efforts on the ground. In summary, we considered the review of reports and other items, survey data, and then we considered the weight that should be given to the various elements. So there are 9 sections of the scorecard that you can see there with the points that each section has. In general, the most important sections are at the top, and then it works down to the sections of less value in score with the bonus items at the bottom. As you can see, there's 130 points available in the mandatory sections 1 through 8, 20 points available in section 9, although that can change a little bit, for 150 total points in the scorecard that we set up. So we'll take a look at each one of those 9 sections. We'll start with the goals and objectives. Now, the first item is goals and objectives are specific. Being specific makes it easier to measure success and to guarantee feasibility that the effort can be completed. This was commonly mentioned or implied in the agency personnel survey results in particular. The second one is that the proposal explains the reasons for those goals and objectives. It helps to understand the larger picture within the state and why the effort was chosen. This also helps to ensure that the agency effort aligns with the outdoor recreation adoption model. The third is that the goals and objectives are measurable It is important to be able to have measurable goals and objectives to determine if the program or effort is successful. Next, the goals and objectives are attainable. It is important that the goals be robust but realistic at the same time. And then finally, the last one is that the program is relevant. The goals and objectives will match focus areas of the grant guidelines and the request for proposals. Organizations that offer grants will have their own areas in which they wish to focus on, and it is important that grant scorers review the focus areas of the organization as well as review them each year, because they may change from year to year depending on different factors. So an organization may want to emphasize one thing one year and then emphasize something different the next year, and you need to review those focus areas, and you get points for matching those areas. The next section of the scorecard is the evaluation. That the evaluation metrics are defined is the first one, and data points have to be identified that match up to the goals. It's also important that the evaluation metrics are obtainable. That's the second item there. It needs to be clearly stated how the measures will be obtained during that effort. And finally, that the evaluation strategies are feasible. This is different than the strategies for the program itself. This is the actual strategies for how it will be evaluated. This ensures that evaluations can be completed, and it is important that the data on the evaluation can be used for case studies and ideally reported back to grant reviewers before the next grant cycle. The next section of the scorecard pertains to the target audience. The first is that the target audience is well defined. Some scorecards that we had reviewed had a single line that simply said that the target audience can be reached. But we felt that there were two things going on here, that it can be reached as one, but that it be defined is another. So we felt that the needs to be defined first. The proposal describes the reason for selecting the target audience. That's the second one within this section. There needs to be a compelling reason that a target audience is selected for a well-planned R3 effort. The effort should be connected to other Angler R3 efforts to help move the customer through the sales funnel or through the outdoor recreation adoption model. The final part of this is that proposals include an indication of the target size, the target audience size. The size must be stated to fully evaluate the proposal, and it's this size value is used in another calculation in another section of the scorecard. So it's important that that the proposal include a estimated target size, audience size. If the size is not precisely known, then an estimate should be given, or at the very least, at least a range of probable target sizes. The fourth section of the scorecard is the program strategy section. The proposal should describe how the target audience will be reached. This determines the feasibility of the effort. Having this separate from defining the target market allows points to be given to a proposal that has a well-defined audience that is, however, hard to reach. Just because an audience is hard to reach doesn't mean it shouldn't be considered. So there's two different things, defining the target audience and reaching it. Basically, an audience may be well-defined even if it is not easy to reach. The fifth part of the scorecard is the budget. And the first item is the budget proposal provides a clear budget. A clear budget is essential to evaluate the proposal. Second, the budget provides a good investment per person measured as a cost per person reached. And I'll go over the calculation here. That's why I said previously it was important that the proposal include an audience size, because that audience size is used in this calculation. Simply put, our example is if you have a grant of $20,000 and you expect to reach 800 people, that's 20,000 divided by 800, it comes to $25 investment per person. And that's how the calculation is done. Obviously, if you start with an audience size that was given as a range, then you would have a range of IPP. And this criterion could get a low score either because the calculation is not included in the proposal, or the calculation might be included in the proposal, but it results in a very high IPP. Either way, that could lower the score that the reviewer gives to the proposal. But the criterion, having it here, ensures that those submitting proposals have fully considered this necessary information. The next part of the scorecard is the timeline. That the timeline is feasible. It prompts the scorers to examine the reality as timeline as a reality check, and it forces the proposers to consider carefully the timeline of their project. The next section is the replicability of the program. The program can be replicated in the future in other communities or in other states. This was ranked highly by both agency personnel and academics. This facilitates the use of established and proven programs. However, it is only part of the scoring, so programs that may be difficult to replicate are not excluded from the overall scoring process. They just might not score well on this particular section. And the last mandatory section is the clarity and presentation of the proposal. That the proposal is clear and well presented is one of the criterion, and it allows points to be awarded for a well-written proposal. Note, however, this is only 5 points because the preponderance of the points should be for more pragmatic areas, such as whether the effort can be carried out and whether the target audience can be reached and so forth. Nonetheless, a poorly presented proposal may be an indication that the proposer will have trouble with other parts of the effort. When you sum these sections 1 through 8, it comes out to 130 points. Now there's a bonus section, is the last part of the scorecard. And this last part of the scorecard is malleable. It allows factors for a particular year to be included. You can see the fourth one down. It's open-ended right now. It assumes that a granting organization would want to add some kind of, or may want to add their own focus. All or some of the criteria in the bonus section can be included in the scorecard in any given year, and additional criteria can be added. This portion is separated from the above because it is considered more bonus and not mandatory. The other sections are all mandatory. The granting organization may choose not to have any of the bonus, or they may have more add to that. We included 3 that we think will be fairly common. That the budget includes cost-sharing funds, which leverages the value of grant funds. That the program can be carried on in the future without further grant funding, because it makes sure that continuing programs don't always need grant money. They should have a viable funding source to be carried on at their own. That the program has been known to be effective in the past is another criterion here that we feel gives points for building on work done previously by the same or other agencies. And as I said, the bottom one allows particular problems that arise to be addressed in any given year. For instance, when the COVID pandemic hit, many people who had not fished before or who had not fished in a long time took up the sport, prompting a focus on retention in the following year, which is this last year. And so it may be in that kind of situation, this fourth one could give points for being a retention program. So we'll now take a look at using the scorecard, or we'll attempt to here. These sections include questions to ask oneself while scoring. It has scales, you enter the scores, and then there's places for additional comments. So I'm going to try to share my screen with the Excel file. This is the actual scorecard. As you can see, you have the criterion on the left, the potential points that can be awarded for that criterion, and then down here you have is where you actually fill in the score that you might want. Like, so the goals and objectives are measurable. Let's say you felt they did good on that, you give them 8 points for that. As you can see, it automatically calculates the subtotal and the total at the top in column D. So simply fill in the scores that you feel each section gets, and it automatically calculates the score. And as you can see, the scale is here. You have 5 points, for instance, that's objectable. So 0 is equal to goals and objectives would be quite difficult to reach, or you give 5 that the goals and objectives are likely to be reached. This column has, in a few places, extra questions to consider that may help clarify what is wanted in that score. And then finally, there's a section within each criterion, there's comments that can be given about that particular criterion. It's optional, they don't need to be filled in, but if the reviewer feels there's something that needs to be said, can put a note in there. And when you go down to the bottom of it, you'll see that's the mandatory part, and then you have the bonus part. And then you have a place here at the very bottom for other general comments if it's not about a particular criterion, but just something about the work program as a whole. Comments can be put in here as well. So let me go back to the all right, so I will, that's how the scorecard was developed, and that shows what's in the scorecard. And we now have time for questions, but I will turn things back to Stephanie at this point. So thanks, Stephanie, if you want to take it away.
Thanks, Marty. And I want to especially thank you, Marty, and your team, and Mark and Allison for all your hard work and diligence in this challenging new project and developing what we hope is a helpful resource for the R3 community. I can say that this scorecard will greatly inform our grant processes to some extent with the current George H.W. Bush Falmouth-South-Pascar Education Fund grants, and definitely will play a critical role in our upcoming state R3 program grants, which will launch next month. And we hope that the scorecard will help inform state agencies in submitting proposals And we also hope that this scorecard will help inform industry partners, organizations at the national level that have other grant programs and supporting R3 needs out there, as well as many states. I know you have your own R3 grants programs in your states, and we hope that this can be a resource for you all, and we'll utilize this. Again, both the report with all the details that Marty talked about to support everything he said, as well as the Excel file, that version of the scorecard, are available on our website in the research section. And there is a link to that page from this webinar page on our website as well. And so now I'll turn it back to Joanne, and we'll answer your questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Steph, Marty, Allison, and Mark, for all of your work on this project and the webinar. So we will now address some questions. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box on the right side of your screen, and we'll read it out loud for the group. So we do have a few questions already. The first one is, would the presenters consider this mainly a subjective survey of opinions? Oh, Mark, you're muted.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect. Yep. Yeah, I'm not sure it's subjective. Now, I think there's a couple of different things going on. There's sort of the research, and then there's the development of the scorecard. So from a research perspective, we talked to a lot of people. We talked to as many R3 coordinators that we could within states, almost 40 people. We talked to a lot of academics, almost 15, I think almost 20 of those individuals. So we selected people who had a direct knowledge about this. So, in my opinion, we got some of the best people in the United States to help us think this through. So I would say, first off, you don't need 800 people to do something like this. You need 60 of the best people in the minds in the R3 community. So that's the first thing I'd say, is that. The next thing I'd say is that the survey was both quantitative as well as qualitative. So I would say, we feel really good about that part, where we developed the quantitative part based on a lot of the qualitative information in the interviews that you all did with us. So it's really a blend of those elements. Now, in terms of the term subjective, I'm not really sure, maybe the person can clarify that. I would argue that any type of scorecard may be subjective. Anybody who went to high school or college knows that how you are graded is pretty darn subjective, unless it's a straight quantitative survey. But we're dealing with something that nobody's really has ever dealt with before, and so again, we tried to meld that qualitative into the quantitative. I would also say that this is our first attempt to really take scoring of grants out of the subjective realm, because in the old days, not with RBFF or anything, but and sometimes you put in grants and you hear well, I like it, I don't like it. That's pretty subjective. So we definitely, that term is an interesting one, because we were trying to develop a scorecard to move away from the subjective to the objective and to develop actual numerical ratings. Is it subjective that we gave this a 5 and this a 10 or this a 20? Yeah, I mean, I think that, I've worked with Stephanie for, 20 years or so at least. She gets it. If everybody came in and said, oh, this should be a 10 instead of a 5 or something, we can work with that, wouldn't we, Steph? I mean, that just makes sense that, we've got our attempt out there. We did the best we could. This scorecard reflects probably most everybody on this webinar. So I think we tried to move it out of the subjective, but any kind of scoring is going to be subjective, including the criteria, including the numbers that you give. So that's how I would answer that. Marty, Allie, Steph, do you have any comments on that one? It's a good question, but more qualitative and quantitative than subjective.
Well, I would just say there was, each respondent is subjective, but our taking a look at them as a whole helps make it more objective.
Good point.
Great, thank you. Before I ask the next question, I just want to remind everybody that we will be posting a recording of the webinar and a PDF of the presentation that you can download to our website after the webinar, and I'll email all attendees once that's available. So next question we have, the person might have just missed the information. So what was the final response numbers of people that provided input for the agencies and the academics? Can you please repeat those?
I think we had almost, I'll have to go back, I think we had about 40 R3 people, and I think we had over a dozen academics. They were the hard ones to find someone who truly knew what they were doing. We didn't want to give this to just anybody. I think 15, 14, I don't know what it was, but I know that we were very picky about who answered this, because we didn't want, we would rather have less responses of people who knew what they were talking about as opposed to just quantity on this one. Some of these surveys lasted an hour, some of them lasted over 2 hours. So we went definitely with the people that we thought knew what they were talking about when it came to not only R3 in fishing and angler R3, but also in the development of criteria on which to develop proposals for grants. So good question.
Great, thank you. Now the next one is, can you give an example of an evaluation component?
Marty, do you want to?
An evaluation component could be the number of licenses sold based on an analysis that was done, or it could be you could do a survey after a program will provide evaluation components. So there's quite a few different things that could be used to evaluate depending on what the program is.
Yeah, and I just add that's, sorry, Mark, that's something we talked about, that it's going to be dependent upon what the effort is as well. And I think that's taken account into the scorecard too, to make sure that it's an appropriate evaluation for the effort that's there.
Yeah, and I would say again, that's an excellent question. And as long as the community, as long as really a lot of the R3, RBFF has been around, one of the things that you hear constantly is we need to evaluate programs, we need to evaluate programs. And we've gotten really good at that, but a lot of the grants that have come in when we were evaluating these grants over the years, a lot of them were pretty nebulous in terms of how that they were gonna evaluate their programs. And so that's why we included it in the scorecard, to really force the proposer to put forth exactly what they were going to do to evaluate and how. I think we've come to that, and it's, again, developing that scorecard is hard because we're kind of setting the criteria on whether you're going to get funded or not. And we thought that evaluation was so important. I mean, there's of all of those points, 25 points are put into that evaluation criteria. That's a lot. What is that, like 15, 18% of all of the points? So yeah. And RBFF is going to be good about this. I mean, they just want to know what are you going to do? How are you going to measure your success? And it's going to, as Steph said, it's going to differ every single year. But in some ways, what we're trying to do is force proposals to really take everything that we've talked about for 2 decades in evaluation and put forth how they're going to do it. That's what I would say. Steph, Marty, I think.
Great.
Yeah, another example I thought about are in some kind of web applications, it's the number of click-throughs that people, not only that they went to the site, but then they clicked on the part where they can buy a license, for instance. That's another example.
Great, thank you all. Let's see, the next question is, what do you consider an appropriate IPP? How did you take into account the quality and depth of the contact into the value?
That's really going to be dependent on the granting organization. Being at this end of it, I've never had to score a grant and give a grant away. I've tried to get them, but I've never given them away. And I don't know, it's going to depend on the organization. And it may be relative to all the proposals that come in. They look at all the different ones they have, and well, this one's high and this one's reasonable, this one's low. So it could vary from year to year and from organization to organization.
Steph, do you want to take that one? No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to add that it's obviously dependent on what the effort is, the reach. And again, that's why that calculation is important. So you could see the level of reach with the dollars. And again, that is one piece of all of the criteria in the scorecard. So I forgot how it was worded in the question, Joanne, but the other parts in terms of what the program is doing and if that's evaluated elsewhere in the scorecard, so we can see what's happening as well, in addition to knowing that score. But I can tell you it's been important for RBFF and how we spend our dollars and making sure and how that reach is and what we're getting for the dollars when we have such a competitive grants program. That is something that comes into play.
Great, thanks. We do have a question from somebody asking if they can see a link to the survey questions that were asked.
Yeah, of course. We can send them the survey instrument or whatever.
Actually, the whole survey is in the appendix of the report. Not a link to it, but the actual, it's a PDF of the whole survey is in the appendix of the report.
Yeah, just check the report.
Thanks. And when I email everybody to let you know the information's online, I can call that out as well and attach the report and the scorecard. Thank you.
I think I bookmarked the PDF so that you should be able to click right to the appendix, I think, hopefully.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks. All right, I think we have a little bit more time and we have a few more questions. Are there any points that surprised RBFF or the researchers? A lot of the information rang true for this asker, and it seems like it was very well researched. So any surprise points from you all?
Well, I would say the one thing was that, people felt that it was important that the programs have an evaluation component, and when we rated it on a 0 to 10 scale, I think that was 9.1 rating of how important it was. When people rated their most successful Angular R3 efforts, and in the survey, they were talking about a specific effort that or program, because that's how we started the survey. We're going to have them choose this most successful effort, and then we had them rate that particular effort. And their own ratings on how well their own efforts that they felt were successful were evaluated was 6.2. So I was a little bit surprised after all this effort, all this emphasis on evaluation, that it was the lowest of the 5 aspects of their most successful program. That ended up being the lowest. So that surprised me a little bit, that it was, they gave ratings to their own efforts as at 6.2 was the mean. So there's obviously programs out there that just aren't being evaluated as good as they can be.
Yeah, and I know the community as a whole is really working hard to, and all of you, Mark, too, you mentioned this, to work on the evaluation side of everything. And I would say for me, in looking at the results, what was really fun to see was the validation between the surveys of state Angular R3 coordinators and these results of the academics and the R3, which included some of our grant reviewers and that process, and to see the table that Marty had showed where the top 3 things were the same for both groups, of having an evaluation component, having goals and objectives that can be measured, and having metrics in place to evaluate. And so that was really good for us to see that everyone's in alignment with those top 3 things. And you see that played out in the scorecard in terms of the weighting on those and how they were put at the top of that in importance as well.
And the report has a whole section on the comparison of the 2 surveys, the academic survey versus the agency personnel survey. And the report itself, if you go to it, has a section where we looked at where they differed and where they were the same.
Yeah, those are really great answers. For me, my biggest surprise was the support of the community for such a scorecard. I was really nervous about this project. It was like, okay, so we're gonna start putting criteria down on who gets money and who doesn't. So I went into it being pretty nervous that people would be like, well, we don't need that. We know what's good and what's not when I review something. So I think I was a little bit nervous about that whole idea of putting sideboards and quantification on not evaluating your program, but evaluating the proposal itself. And so my surprise was the support by the community. We heard so many times, oh, thank goodness, we really want that. We've put proposals in, we didn't get one, but we got another one, we weren't sure why. We really like to have it spelled out more in terms of how we can do better. And we want to do the right thing, but tell me how. What should my proposals say and what shouldn't they say? Because so many times you've seen, some examples that people would say would be things like, I received a really well-written proposal and it got scored high, but it wasn't a very good project. Or vice versa, that they might get a really good project, but it wasn't written very well or didn't have some of the components. So for me, in addition to what Marty and Steph said were their surprises, my surprise was the real support for the project and for the scorecard. Give me some sideboards upon which I can develop a better proposal. Yeah, good
Great.
question. Hadn't thought of that one, so that was a good one. Before these things, you're like, what kind of questions are people going to ask? So that's a good one.
Great, thanks. Yeah, there's been a lot of good ones. Next question might be more for Stephanie. Is there a baseline IPP number that RBFF has used in the past?
No, there isn't, in that it really is dependent, and this is a new thing. I can say that we have informally looked at that behind the scenes, but not it's not something that's been in the actual proposal requirement so far. So that is something that's going to come out in the State R3 program grants, and it is included in the Vamos a Pescar Education Fund grants right now too, to calculate that, to have applicants think that through and calculate that, because I can tell you that the budget is a challenging piece to review, and it is important that applicants outline that clearly for us. And so that's a new ask to have that calculation of folks as well.
And I'd like to.
No, go ahead, Mark.
Okay.
I would say that
I might be stepping out of line here, so Steph sort of slap me down. But the term subjective came out, or somebody had written a question about subjective. And I do think that's where there's good subjectivity, because if you say it's going to cost you a bunch of money to reach 5 people, somebody else says I'm going to spend the same amount of money for 200 or 1,000 people. I mean, the subjective part on that, or the way that this can be used by the reviewer, is 5 AP writers or 5 magazine writers that hit millions of people might be rated much higher than something that reaches just a regular person or something. So there's sort of that sliding scale. I would say, and again, I don't want to step out of line here because I've judged a lot of proposals before, but that's going to depend on who those people are. So I don't want it to make people nervous. We just want people to think about what that return really is. Because again, if you're spending $5,000 or $10,000 on somebody who can reach 1 million people, you might be reaching one person, but yeah, you're really not. You're reaching thousands of people from that return on investment. Is that true, Steph? I mean, we're not saying you have to hit 10 people for $5 each or something. That we wanted to put it in there to make sure people thought about what cost versus gains.
Yes, that's exactly a great way to put it. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, and it is one part of all of the criteria that we reviewed in the scorecard. So there are a number of things that factor into the overall score. Yeah, thank you, Mark, for saying that.
I would say, if I could add one thing to that, is place to start is how much a typical license costs would be one measure that to compare it against. If your IPP is higher than the license cost, then it's probably not a very effective program. If you're spending $50 to get somebody to buy a $40 license, you'd be better off not doing the program.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you all. I think we have time for one more question. And it is, do we include agency matching funds in the total grant amount when calculating IPP?
Yeah, it would be the total cost of the project, whether that's, because at least I can speak for our program and how we have it set up, the total cost of the program, we have you divided out by what's the ask of us and what's the match. So it would be looking at the total overall of what it takes to do that program.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. And there are a few general comments about some of the about the R3 grants. So all of you can contact Stephanie Hussey on those. I think that's about it for questions. Yeah. So thank you all very much for joining us. As a reminder, we will put up a recording and the PDF of the PowerPoint presentation online. I will email all that to you when it is ready to be downloaded, and I'll also include the information on the report and the scorecard. So thanks again for joining us. If you can please take a quick minute to fill out the survey that will pop up as you leave the webinar, that would be great. We really appreciate your feedback on today's webinar. Thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. See ya.
Thank you.